to another episode of the Jim Powell Report. I'm your host, Jim Powell, and we have a very special report tonight with Audra Parker, Director for the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound, and with a very important update on the issues that are going on with the Cape Wind project. Audra, it's wonderful to have you on the show again.
Thank you, Jim. Nice to see you again.
We're always very appreciative of your very up-to-date and informative updates, so thank you for being here. And I understand the project is stalled and there are a lot more expenses and that more of the agencies that are involved, or as more knowledge is coming out and the facts are being laid out before the public, that they're becoming more critical of this whole project and that other alternatives exist. And I want to talk to you about all those a little bit at a time here. But let's start out, where are we in this process?
Okay, well, incredibly, we're 6 or 7 years into it, and we still don't have any kind of regulations in place in general for how do you permit projects like Cape Wind and other renewable energy projects on federal lands or the outer continental shelf. So we're still in the process of coming out with regulations. MMS, which is the Federal Agency Mineral Management Service, which is in charge of permitting Cape Wind, establishing these regulations, just issued the draft rules in the last month or so, and now there's a public comment period going on with that. And at the same time, they're going through and reviewing the Cape Wind project and assessing a lot of the comments that they already got on Cape Wind through both the hearings that were held here on Martha's Vineyard as well as other locations.
In Nantucket and on the Cape.
Yep, and in Boston.
And with this unprecedented development proposal by Cape Wind, being the largest offshore wind project of its type that's ever come before the federal government. The federal government doesn't have a rubric or a real model yet to share and receive the information that they've been given. So they don't really have the rules.
Right.
And the project is now being projected that it's going to be about $1.7 billion in federal tax credits and things like that. So it's becoming a larger economic model just from the most conservative estimates.
Yeah, when the project was first proposed, they were saying it was about $700 million already, a large amount of money or capital investment to build the project. But now we've had basically increase in steel prices, shortage of manufacturing capacity for the turbines, and it's driven the prices way up. So now, $1.5, $1.7 billion. And again, largely funded through subsidies and credits coming from the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. And it would seem to me that now that a barrel of gasoline, a barrel of oil costs so much now, it's going to cost a lot more money to try to move all this equipment, construction equipment, out into the Sound. All the pieces of metal and the concrete they want to put up there. That would leave a big carbon footprint, wouldn't it?
Right, and also just the dollar cost in addition to that is going to be huge to, basically ultimately to the ratepayers. We were talking about the federal agency, MMS. They have a report that they published called a Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or DEIS, a lot of alphabets here. And in that, they showed that the cost of generating electricity from Cape Wind would be about 2 times what we're currently paying, or 3 times if you take out the subsidies. So the average cost here is maybe $60 per megawatt hour. They're looking at $120 or $130 per megawatt hour after subsidies and $190 per megawatt hour before subsidies. And we still don't know, 6, 7 years later, how are those costs going to translate to our monthly bills?
And for the argument that the farther out you go into the ocean, you have a exponential growth in the wind velocity,
right,
which scientifically speaking and technologically speaking improves your ability to generate wind.
That's right.
Then it would, therefore, if you're going to use that basis for an argument to propose putting in a wind farm like this, why don't you put the wind farm out even farther?
Well, that's a good question. You would do that. And in fact, in the last year, pretty recently in fact, there's another company called Blue H that has come up with just such a proposal. And they are saying that not only would the cost be lower, the wind speeds would be stronger, so they'd be generating more power for the same size footprint, but it would have a lot fewer negative impacts. You potentially wouldn't have the issues or the negative impacts on fisheries like you do from Cape Wind. You wouldn't be in the way of navigation channels. You wouldn't have an impact on the flights going through Nantucket Sound. So potentially more wind, lower cost, and fewer negative impacts.
And no visual impact.
Right, exactly. No visual impact.
Many people consider Nantucket Sound a national heritage, a national scenic wonder in itself. And it's a viewscape that for centuries, from the thousands of years ago, the Wampanoags even used to have, before the oceans rose, they had land out there.
That's right.
And they know that there are people out there. So that there were civilizations anciently, but that during the colonial period in the 18th and 19th century, that Nantucket Sound was a busier waterway than even Boston. So just the rich heritage and the history of that waterway and the viewscape of it from either the water or the land is worth preserving.
Oh, completely. I mean, a lot of the tourism economy here is drawn from Nantucket Sound being, you know, the heart and soul of the Cape and Islands. So you have an economic impact, and then you've got a lot of historic landmarks here. The whole island of Nantucket is a historic landmark.
I don't think a lot of people know that Nantucket has a national historic district.
Yes, it does. It's the whole island is designated as such. In fact, in this, in this process, we've seen that they have said that there would be an adverse impact on a lot of these historic properties. So it's just, I mean, the project is just totally incongruous, totally out of character with the area.
And that's what's coming out in this whole hearing process. And thank goodness that we're taking some time, rather than just rushing a developer through. It'd be like on Martha's Vineyard if we let McDonald's just come rush in and have 2 or 3 meetings. We might have a whole chain of McDonald's on the island or Dunkin' Donuts. We don't want that. We're trying to maintain our island identity and make it different.
And Jim, if you really think about the scale of this project, I know this is something that probably people know, but if you can just imagine it, it's 130 individual turbines. Each one is 18 feet in diameter, so the size of a decent-sized room. 440 feet tall, so the size of a 40-story building, a skyscraper.
That's much taller than the Statue of Liberty.
That's right, and covering 25 square miles, which is about the size of the island of Manhattan. So putting this up would make this one of the largest skylines in the whole United States. I mean, the scale is almost unimaginable.
Talking about Manhattan and New York, isn't there a Long Island wind farm that's been shut down because of economic reasons?
Exactly. It's a good point you raised that. There's a few of them, in fact. Over the last year or so, we've had Long Island Power Authority project that was canceled, and another one off the coast of Texas, and they were basically canceled because either the economics don't work, or you would have to charge the consumers so much to make the economics work that they would be bearing, basically a high burden and bearing the brunt of it. So these projects
can't afford that now.
No, we definitely can't, and people need to understand that that's part of the equation. That's another one of the downsides of this, that offshore wind is a very expensive way to generate a fairly small amount of power.
But on the good side, we can see a lot of positive development in saving money with land-based wind that's being produced. I know at Massachusetts Maritime that one wind tower, it's much shorter than these that are proposed, but that one wind tower saved them $330,000 last year.
Right.
And there are other ones. I know the town of Aquina is being considered to be an energy district of critical planning concern, and that through proper planning that we can conservatively place these windmills, and they have, look at the town of Hull.
Exactly, and they're municipally driven, and they're driven by the people in the area. They're driven by the local communities. They're not driven by a developer that's chosen. You're right, an outside private developer that's chosen a site that might work well for him, but really isn't in the public interest because of all the conflicts.
Yeah, and that's very important. And the MMS is listening now to different aspects of this project, what the historical, what the sacred, what the viewscape issues are, not just the economic.
Right.
I know that during the public hearing process that here in Martha's Vineyard, many fishermen spoke up and said, we reported our catches to the state of Massachusetts, and the Marine Fisheries Recovery Commission has that data, and that some of the data that the fishermen have show much different quantities and totals than those that were estimated and put into the DEIS from Cape Wind. And so the disparity between what's in the actual application if the MMS isn't called out and the issue addressed,
Right.
then they don't really know that it's not factual.
And that's why the public comment period and those hearings and the written submissions are so valuable, and that's in fact what MMS is doing now. They're required to basically address each and every one of those issue areas that are pointed out. And you pointed out the fisheries issues where it was underreported. You've got the commercial fishermen are up in arms about this project. They are so opposed to it, understanding that it's going to displace commercial fishing, which is a traditional way of life here, and it's one at Horseshoe Shoal. The proposed footprint is one of the most lucrative and productive fishing grounds
It's very productive.
in all of Nantucket
and also
Sound.
Spawning.
Right.
They also spawn there. So if you're trying to create clean energy, you don't want to put it right in the middle of
a fishing
very
ground.
productive spawning, a nursery.
Right.
In your own home, it's good to have a refrigerator and I want to say a toilet and a sofa, but you don't put your sofa in your bathroom, you don't put your toilet in your kitchen, nor your fridge in your bathroom.
Most people don't, right?
You have to put things in the right place, or it's not going to work. You have to have things hooked up
Right.
correctly.
And you're talking about this project, which is basically in the middle, or would be in the middle of a productive fishing ground, right smack dab in the middle of navigation routes and shipping channels. You've got the ferries bringing something like 3 million passengers between the Cape and the islands every year. You're right underneath, air traffic routes, air traffic patterns, and off the coast of an economy that depends largely on, tourism, people coming here for the natural view. It's really the worst location.
Speaking of view and air traffic, with all the thousands of flights, I know during the month of August that the Martha's Vineyard and the Nantucket airports during a 1 week long period, the last week of August, are the busiest airports in the state of Massachusetts, even more so than Logan, because of the thousands of flights going out. And we know from the tragic and very sad experience with John Kennedy that even in fog, a pilot, unless they're IFR trained, may become disoriented, and that search and rescue by Coast Guard helicopters is not going to happen if you have an array of 130 wind turbines out there, because they have cables under the water in between them and everything. You just can't send a helicopter. It would become a recovery mission, and just send boats out.
No, there's definitely
I don't think people realize.
No, there's definitely significant public safety
feet
issues
to clear these windmills.
In fact, the way it works today, from my understanding, is that over any kind of a structure, like a wind turbine, or over land, you have to maintain a 500-foot margin above that structure. Versus over water, you can go down to the, close to the surface. So basically today, if you're going down, it's basically pushing you from pragmatically 0 up to 940 feet, and that's pushing you into the ceiling. And so if you're flying VFR, by visual flight, you won't even be able to fly over that footprint over, very many days of the year. And I was looking at a weather chart or a fog table the other day. How many days of fog would you think out of the year are characterized in Nantucket Sound?
Oh, many.
200. 200 days of fog.
Two-thirds of the year.
Two-thirds of the year. And in the summer months, when you have the most traffic, that's when you have the most fog. So this is,
and the wind velocity is the lowest. So when you have the greatest need for the electrical power, the wind velocity is the lowest. And the danger is the highest if it goes in that one spot. But if you just put the wind towers to the south or to the east in the original proposal, or up near Buzzards Bay or Massachusetts Maritime, that would prevent any problems.
Well, I think if another example of why the Blue H project may make more sense and may in fact be a much better alternative is it would be out of these air traffic routes. It would be out of the shipping and navigation lanes. I mean, if you just look at a map and look at the amount of traffic and activity, fishing, boating, plane traffic, it is just the worst possible location for an industrial scale project.
For some people that have the argument that we need to move forward, just like the Apollo program began with Apollo 1, and went through, and they had some tragedies. There was a fire in the cabin, and then Apollo 13, but there was Apollo 11. They landed on the moon. There were some good benefits. So for those people that say, gee, you know, I don't really like them putting the windmills in there, but we need to move the process forward. We need to experiment so they can move the process forward. I know that if we say, gee, you know, that argument doesn't fit for this particular project because of its scope and size. You don't experiment with Nantucket Sound. It's a national scenic wonder. You know, you wouldn't experiment out in the middle of the Grand Canyon, but there are other private developers coming along. And as the Mineral and Management Service comes up with better regulations and rules,
or any regulations,
they don't even have them now, that it will make it easier for developers to realize that the federal government is serious about inviting applicants to develop wind power. And so then that creates a whole process. And so that's why you're going to get companies like Blue H. And look at the towns of Edgartown and Nantucket have come up with they're working on this agreement to put in some water turbines and create electricity through hydroelectric power with these water turbines year-round, because the Gulf Stream kind of dips in, it bends in towards Chappaquiddick and heads out through Nantucket. So that'd be even better year-round.
And one of the points you just made in terms of the experience base, I mean, Cape Wind was positioning themselves as, you know, America's first offshore wind farm, and how they would basically accelerate the development of offshore wind. Well, you know, 7 years later, it's still being described, or is being described, as a stalled project. And from an experience base, we have experience. We have 10 or 15 years of experience in Europe. We need only look there to learn both from the positives and negatives. And if we look out there, we've seen a lot of operational failures because it's a, you know, the marine environment is very harsh. We've seen a movement to go into deeper waters, and we've seen almost a zoning approach where they've said, okay, here are appropriate areas for development. In fact, maybe we'll even put in the transmission infrastructure, and then the developer can just plug into that. And here are inappropriate areas of development. And that's what makes the process go more quickly. Here, you've got the developer coming in and having to go through the process to maybe only to learn that, no, sorry, this wasn't an appropriate place at all.
And they could save a lot more time if they could just choose one of their other locations, perhaps. But outside of the MMS, there are 20 some odd permits from different agencies that this whole application needs to go through. What are some of those? What are the other steps?
Well, they're at a federal level, at a state level, regional, and locally. So they're either permits or some sort of authorizations. So for example, we already talked about MMS. We've got the Federal Aviation Authority or Administration, FAA.
Yes.
We've got the United States Coast Guard that has to ensure safe navigation in Nantucket Sound. We've got the EPA involved. We've got the Cape Cod Commission. We've got the towns of Yarmouth and Barnstable, you know, which is where the cables make landfall. At the state, we've got Coastal Zone Management, the Energy Facility Siting Board. I mean, there's a whole host of permits.
The Steamship Authority?
Well, I don't know that they have
to weigh in on it?
They weigh in on it as an agency, but they don't have an ultimate permit. But there are, as you point out, you know, probably close to 20 permits. And at this point, this project is so far from a done deal. Again, a stalled project because they have one permit at this point at the state level, and that's only for the cable. So, you know, we're going through these processes, but it's far from done.
Let's talk a little bit more about the economic models. With all this time that's going on, you know, people on both sides are saying, gee, you know, if we'd built it earlier or whatever, it wouldn't cost us. But when you stick metal out in the ocean and that ocean water hits up against the metal, it's going to corrode it. And someday someone's going to have to repair it and fix it. Many of these wind projects around the world get shut down, and then they have to repair and maintain. Do we want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, I guess, two big examples I could give you in Europe. One of them was Horns Reef, which had been at one point, I think, the largest installation or one of the largest. And they had operating failures on all 80 turbines. They all had to be taken down, brought back to shore, repaired, and then reinstalled. So for a significant period of time, it wasn't operating at all, and there was a significant amount of cost to doing those repairs. And I think that was after 2 years of operation, where these things are supposed to have a 20-year lifespan. And then more recently, another one in Europe as well, called Newstead, had a big mechanical failure of what's called their transformer substation. Basically, there's a transformer substation or an electrical service platform that transforms the power. So all the turbines are connected by cable to this big structure, and the structure looks basically like a 10-story parking garage, very industrial looking.
It's full of oil.
Would be exactly 40,000 gallons of oil, and the question has been asked is, what's so clean
Where's it
about
gonna go?
40,000 gallons of oil in the middle of our beaches in Nantucket Sound? But they had a mechanical problem on that, and it was out of service for months.
What happens if there's an oil leak? Have people considered that every single municipality around Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard will have to have oil absorption booms and environmental cleanup equipment? Who's going to pay for that?
Well, that is one of the things I remember from going to some of the Cape Cod Commission hearings. They were asking about what is very specifically the oil spill response plan and who does bear the burden of it, and are the towns, if they do bear the burden, are they even equipped to handle something like that? So it's another good question, and it's another reason that we shouldn't be evaluating Cape Wind or any project before we have the rules of the game in place. We don't have the regulations done, but we're going forward with just this one project.
Yes, and it seems like that some people are saying, oh, well, damn it all. we have to do something about the big problem we have with energy. So is sticking 130 wind turbines out in the middle of the ocean between Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and the Cape, is that the right solution? Is that the best solution?
It's a symbolic sacrifice of Nantucket Sound, is really what it is in a nutshell.
And we're already seeing positive steps in the town of Hull, in the town of Wareham. Here in Martha's Vineyard, we have windmills that are going up. They're going up around the area.
Right.
But those are municipal projects.
Right, which make a lot more sense. And in fact...
or private citizens are putting them up.
Right, right. And in fact, now we have a bill that got passed in the last month or so in Massachusetts, where previously we had something called the Massachusetts Ocean Sanctuary Act, and it basically protected sanctuaries like the state waters of Nantucket Sound, which go out from the islands and the mainland 3 miles, and basically prohibited any kind of electrical generation. Now we have this ocean bill that was passed, and it has a very good intent in that it is aimed at putting together some kind of a planning process so that we can use our state waters, well. How do we use this resource? Almost like a zoning approach for land. But they put in an exemption for renewable energy projects. So now potentially, pending this planning process, we could not even be faced with not only Cape Wind, in the federal lands within Nantucket Sound, but potentially small projects showing up all along our beaches and all along our shorelines in waters that were protected before.
Yes.
So we have to be vigilant about that planning process and about what is going to happen in our state sanctuaries.
So this is a complicated process.
It
On
is.
one side, the proposals coming forward and the rules aren't even created yet to evaluate the project. A lot of people at the public hearings are saying, hey, we want some alternative energy now. Other people are saying, hey, wait a minute. You've got to preserve this national landmark and the viewscape and fishing grounds, and what about the navigational issues? All these things that we've talked about.
If you think about it, one of the things that the Alliance has been saying for years now is that we do have to do something. We have to have some sort of renewable energy. We do need to move forward, but in the right locations. And deep water projects make so much sense. There was some discussion before about the timeline. How long do we have to wait for those deep water projects? But with the fact that the regulations aren't in place, with the fact that Blue H and other alternatives are popping up, deep water is really the way to go. As we said before, fewer negative impacts, stronger winds, more power.
And so
it's a no-brainer.
let's catch the vision. Let's catch the vision. To protect Nantucket Sound and then to use the rest of the ocean area correctly for alternative energy production is the right way to go. That's the other piece of the puzzle.
Exactly, and in the same timeline. Because if you think about it, the process that Cape Wind has taken so many years, and it's still so many years
It's
out.
a flawed process.
And right, or a process that's not in place with a flawed project. Meanwhile,
Yes,
you know,
yeah.
potentially you have a demonstration project going up, you know, if it's approved with Blue H, and could potentially be a commercial scale project in a very similar timeline. So it's not a question, it's a, you know, it's a false choice to say we've got to wait 10 years. No, we don't. It could potentially be in the same timeline because, you know, unfortunately Cape Wind was in a position where there was no process in place. So, you know, I think one of the values of that project was it jump-started the process. We needed to start looking at, you know, how do you evaluate these projects and where do you put them and what's the right way to move forward, not what's the wrong way to move forward.
Yes, and once a permit is issued, it really doesn't take a long time to put the foundation in and anchor these wind towers, or if you're going to float them, it takes a lot less time. You're talking less than a year or a year and a half
I think Cape
to
Wind's,
get everything up and running.
Yeah, I think Cape Wind was saying a 2-year construction period, which really would be, you know, I think very, very invasive if you can think about 2 years of constructing, again, a project in the scale that we talked about, you know, 440-foot structures.
And there are a lot of other, I know the name Wampanoag tribe, the people of the first light, that the very viewscape itself of Nantucket Sound to the east is part of their sacred lineage, and as sovereign nations in our area, that there are lots of federal laws and treaties that have to be looked at that could, you know, just stop it.
They're basically saying that unobstructed viewscape for them is of, you know, paramount religious and cultural significance. They're saying that Horseshoe Shoal was once dry land. They hunted there, you know, they even buried their people there. And so it has a huge significance not only to them, but since they're the easternmost tribe, they also have the backing of what's called USET, or the U.S. Eastern Tribes. It's a group of 25 tribes that have said the same thing. They oppose this project because it would have, you know, unacceptable impacts to them culturally and religiously.
And there are federal treaties that protect that. So we've got a lot of different agencies that are looking at this whole project.
That's right.
And we're grateful that the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound is looking at it and helping to lead the charge, and that there are many people that want to know what the facts are and know where we are in the process. And so
I was very encouraged by the last round of public hearings because it was, you know, the Army Corps did it 3 years ago. And now 3 years later, we had a huge showing of opposition, and all the key stakeholders, whether it's the fishermen, the tribes, the chambers of commerce, the ferry operators, the local airports, they all came out in opposition to it, and they're all very vocal with their very legitimate concerns about this. And I think the opposition is, you know, stronger and more vocal and more entrenched than ever.
as they get more information, too.
Exactly.
So it's good that we take some time with this process and do it right.
That's right.
And so we want to thank you, Audra,
Thank you.
for the great update. And thank you for listening to this issue of the Jim Powell Report. I'm your host, Jim Powell, and we want to thank our sponsor, Humphrey's Bakeries, here in Martha's Vineyard, and hope that you will stay informed. And we'd like you to be able to get in touch with the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. We'll flash the number up here on the board, and please stay in touch and be informed and do what's right to help protect our national resources. And I hope you'll watch us soon, and we'll see you real soon. Bye.